Hi, welcome back to the shop. Thanks for stopping by. This week's project is an experiment in coloring and burning wood. I've never burned a piece before, and I thought I would try some dye. Now, I don't have dye like you'd see in some of the other videos if you watch many turning videos. A lot of my friends in the UK use different dyes, different brands. I'm going to try doing this with the same Aluminite dye that I use in my resin. So this is a piece of red pine. I cut it down this summer at my son's place. It is wet and frozen. And my thought is that when I get it down to the right size, I will be able to dry it when I burn it, because I will turn the walls very thin. I'm going to make a little hollow form out of it. Actually, I was hoping to make a big hollow form out of it, but you'll see when I stop here that it is full of worms. Worms ate it pretty significantly from the time I cut it here in the summer till it froze up. So this is frozen and wet and worm chewed, but I'm going to get it turned down here really quickly. I'll speed this up and you can see what I end up with here. So this is more about the coloring than the turning. So I know lots of people don't like it when I speed up my turning, but this video really is just an experiment in burning and coloring this piece of wood, and actually the finish as well, something different on finish. So you can see the discoloration in the wood, and when you cut any softwood in the summer, you will get sap stain. So the thumb that the old timers use here is that you cut your pine in months that have an R in them, and I think I cut this in July or August. So you do get stain that way. But again, I had no intentions of turning any of this, but just the idea came to me, and I thought I wanted to give it a try. So you can see the wormholes in this, and they go really deep actually. So I do get a piece that doesn't have many wormholes in it. Actually, just a very small one. So I'm going to speed this up now and get this thing gnawed down to a size I can work with, without wormholes. And we're still peppered with holes, so I'm not down far enough yet. Also got lots of stain here. So at this point I was wondering if I was actually going to get a piece that I could salvage out of this at all. Alright, so I got down to this point and it looked like I was going to get a clean piece of wood here that I could work with. Alright, so this actually broke off before I got cut all the way through, which was a bit of a surprise, but no damage done. So just gathered it back up and put it back in between centers and finished off parting the other end. Now that it's mounted in the chuck, I'm just cleaning up some tool lines and making sure everything is balanced up here nicely. And just a really quick sand to make sure there weren't any ridges, any tool lines on the outside. It's going to be burned, so it doesn't need to be finished sanded to any fine degree. Before I start to burn the piece that we're working on, I want to show you the test piece that I did before I started this piece. So this is another piece of red pine, and you can see that the grain lines don't burn like the cells in between the grain. So what you get is the ridges from the grain line. Now this is a little tighter grown piece of wood, much tighter grown piece of wood than the one that I'm turning. So you'll see in the piece the grain lines don't run up and down like this. They're very open grain, so there's not nearly as many grain lines in it. I think the whole piece might have maybe been 12 years old, 12 rings in it. So once the piece is burned and you brush away the burned cells, you get the raise effect on the grain, so it gives you an irregular surface. Now you see these grain lines don't run up and down. They go swirly crossways, more horizontal than vertical. Now I started to burn this and I realized that I really need to dry this thing out with the torch while I'm burning it. So I glued in here shortly and stopped, and then I hollowed it out first to about 1/8 of an inch wall thickness. I'm not going to show a lot of the hollowing, but it took longer to get the wet shavings out of the middle than it did to hollow it actually. Alright, so I made sure that I had all the shavings swept up around my lathe, off my lathe bed and on the floor. I had my fire extinguisher 2 arm lengths away, and so I tried to get a nice even burn on this, and it was kind of interesting because where there were little streaks of stain, that didn't burn as good as the regular, the unstained wood. And I wanted to get a good burned edge on the lip of the vessel as well, so that it would be irregular. So I burned inside and outside here. Now I'm just taking a brass brush, and I've already started here off camera, but I'm just scraping away the burned material. And you see that I'm working kind of vertically so that there's not going to be radial lines around it. And I think that's the look that I was going to prefer more than having lines going around the circumference of the vessel. So I was getting a little bit of the effect that I wanted, not as much as I wanted. So I just wiped off the burned material that was here now, and then I actually went back over and I burned it again. And the reason that I did that is I didn't get enough texture on the outside, so the grain lines weren't standing out as much as I wanted them to. So I thought I'd burn away a little bit more of the material in between them. You can see from the lip of the vessel, I'm getting a nice uneven effect, which is what I really wanted there. Now this time when I went back over it, I used a larger carbon steel bristle brush, because I wasn't getting very many texture lines in the surface, which I kind of was hoping for. So I used this more aggressive brush, and then I just cleaned it up with a smaller carbon steel brush afterwards too, and that gave me a pretty good surface, one I was happy with. Alright, so I got this all wiped up with the brushes and a cloth, dry cloth, and using the Illuminite dye that I use in my resin. I wasn't sure how that was going to work out, but it seemed to be pretty nice on my test piece, so thought I'd give it a go. So what I found is that this didn't dry very quickly. So I put a pretty good application on it, I let it soak in pretty well. And then I came back, dried it off, wiped off the excess with a cloth here, as you can see. And then I did dry it with a heat gun, which is a little hard to do in red pine because you wind up heating up the pitch. But if this was ash, it would have been fine. But I did get it so that it was dry. So I used this Rust-Oleum clear lacquer aerosol. And this is where I made my mistake. I thought that the dye would seal the pores in the wood so that the lacquer would build on top of the dye, and it did not. So I should have put sanding sealer on right here before I put on any lacquer, and let it dry in and seal it up really well, and then build my lacquer on top of that. You'll see here as we go why. So here's the first coat, and you can see there's dry spots, which you would expect. I did leave my lathe rotating. It'll go very slowly. This is probably turning, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 RPM. So it's really nice speed to put lacquer on. So I jumped from the first coat to the 40th coat. And I've sanded this back a little bit, so you can see the dry spots on this where it did not build at all. So I went back and sanded it back a little bit, and then I'm going to put some sanding sealer on the whole thing here now, and hope that I can get a finish build on this and that it doesn't turn white on me underneath. So I put 2 coats of this Mylan sanding sealer on this. So by hand, the same way that I sanded back the lacquer the first time, by hand I took a white Scotch-Brite pad, just denibbed the sanding sealer, and then I started building up coats of lacquer again. And it looks a little better this time. And after about 20 coats of lacquer, and you can see there's a really nice gloss, really nice finish on most of this, there were still a few little places that didn't gloss up. They were still dry. So I took a little bit more sanding sealer and I just brushed it on only the places that needed it. And I had my fingers crossed. You can see how dry that is where I just put the brush right there. It didn't turn white underneath, so I was really happy about that. So once that sanding sealer dried, I put about another 20 coats of finish on the outside. It turned out really well. It's an irregular surface, so the light's kind of reflecting off it all over the place, but it was just as smooth as glass in terms of the finish. It was really hard to get decent pictures of it, to be honest. I will put pictures up at the end, as usual, but the way the light reflects off it, it was really hard to get a decent picture that was a good representation of the finish. But I will put the pictures up at the end, and if you're still with me, thanks so much for sticking around. I really appreciate it. Thanks again to everyone who subscribes to the channel and who watches my videos. I appreciate that a ton as well. So hope you enjoyed this, and we will see you next time.